The lead steers hit the current harder than anyone expected, and Cole Ashby felt the whole herd's shape start to break apart in front of him. June 1971. Ashwood Ford, a wide brown stretch of the Yellowstone running high off a wet spring, 40 miles north of Miles City. 800 head of Bar K cattle were 3 days into a 4-day drive when the crossing went wrong in the first 90 seconds. The herd's front bunching and turning against the push of the water instead of angling with it. Exactly the mistake his father had once described a man named Denby making 12 years before Cole was ever born. Fighting the current straight on, looking brave, being wrong. "Hold the line!" Trail boss Walt Ender was shouting from the near bank, and the point riders were trying, spurring their horses deeper, trying to muscle 800 panicking animals back onto a crossing angle the river had already made impossible. Cole was 19. He rode drag, the back of the herd, the position given to the man nobody trusted, and in 3 days on this drive, nobody had said his name without saying "freight hauler's boy" first. His father hadn't run cattle. He'd run freight and livery through Miller's Creek country, hauling stock through crossings meaner than anything a big outfit usually saw, and it was work that taught a man to read a river's push the way another man might read weather, without either of them ever calling it a skill worth naming out loud. He'd heard the joke 3 nights running at the fire, an expert on getting stuck. He'd said nothing back. 19 years of standing at the edges of fires that didn't want him at their center had taught him that. He wasn't thinking about any of that now. He put his horse into the water at an angle, not against the current, but reading it, letting the river's own push do half the work instead of fighting it the way the point riders were fighting it, cutting downstream of the panicking lead steers to a position his father had described 100 times as nothing but common sense. "Let 'em bunch downstream!" His voice cracked doing it. "Stop holding the line! Let them drift and turn after, not before!" Walt Ender had 11 years running this outfit, a hand he'd nearly lost on a bad crossing 3 years back on a dab crossing, and about 2 seconds to decide whether to trust a shout from the man he'd put at the back of his herd on purpose. "Let 'em give line! Let them drift and turn after!" The point riders eased off, scared and disciplined enough to obey their boss mid-panic. The current took the herd's front where it wanted to go. What had been a mad, sideways, dying fight against the river resolved almost at once into a long, controlled, downstream angled crossing that used the water instead of losing to it. It took 4 more minutes, and every one of those minutes had teeth. The current dragged hard at the herd's flanks the whole way. 2 steers went under and came up again, eyes wide, legs still swimming before they'd fully surfaced. A horse lost its footing on a hidden drop in the riverbed. It floundered, head going under, its rider hauling it back up by the reins with both hands. 3 strides later, it found solid ground. Walt Ender's voice was the only thing holding 11 men and 800 animals to a plan that, for most of those 4 minutes, still looked like it might not work. Nobody drowned. Not a rider, not a steer, not one animal lost to a river that killed a man on this same stretch 12 years before Cole Ashby was ever born. 3 days earlier, Cole had stood at the edge of the Bar K's trail campfire for 20 minutes before anybody spoke to him. Dwayne Pratt saw him first. Pratt was the drive's second, wiry, 40-some, a face like a fist. 20 years riding for outfits whose names meant something in 3 counties. "Boys." Pratt didn't turn his head all the way, just enough. "Look what wandered up. Ashby's kid, freight hauler's boy, come to play cowboy." Laughter went round the fire, low and easy, the kind that cost nothing because everyone's already agreed on the joke before it's told. "Heard your daddy hauled feed sacks through Miller's Creek so many times the horses knew the way blind," said Otto Kraft, a younger hand, grinning around a mouthful of beans. "That make you an expert on crossing water, then?" "That's exactly what it makes him, an expert on getting stuck." Cole set his bedroll down at a careful distance, not so close as to presume, not so far as to look like he was hiding, and said nothing at all. He lay awake a long while that first night, the fire down to embers, the rest of the crew's breathing gone slow and even around him. He'd done this math before, in enough camps and towns to know its shape by heart. 3 days of silence bought him nothing. 3 days of arguing bought him less. What he actually had, the only thing he'd ever really had, was whatever his hands and his eyes could do when it mattered, and the small, stubborn certainty, worn thin from use but not gone yet, that eventually a place would exist where that turned out to be enough. He didn't know yet if this drive was going to be that place. He only knew he'd run out of other places to find out. Walt Ender watched the fire from across it, and didn't join the laughing and didn't stop it either. He had exactly one standard by which he judged a man before trusting him near 800 head of cattle in open country. Who taught you, and can I trust what they taught you? Cole Ashby had no answer to the first half that meant anything to Walt, and the second half never got asked. You ride drag, you do what you're told, when you're told, and you don't get creative. We clear? Yes, sir. That's the whole conversation, and it was. The first 2 days told Cole nothing he didn't already know about where he stood. Pratt found reasons to ride past the rear of the herd and comment on the dust, the pace, the general uselessness of a man who couldn't read cattle because he'd never really worked them, only hauled freight past them. "Freight boy's earning his dust today," Pratt said loud enough to carry up the line and got his laugh from Otto Kraft and one or two others near enough to hear. Cole said nothing. What none of them saw, because none of them had any reason left to look past the joke they'd already settled on, was the way he read the herd the whole 2 days. How cattle bunched and spread with the ground, how a lead steer's ears and gait told a man 5 minutes before the herd itself knew it would balk. His father's work had taught him all of it without either of them ever calling it a skill. Nobody at the fire asked what that work required. They only asked whose name it was on. He thought, riding drag through the worst of the dust that second afternoon, about the last time somebody had asked him a real question about himself instead of about his father. He couldn't place it. It might have been years. On the second evening, an older hand named Silas Redmond, 61, half-crippled in one hip, kept on the outfit mostly for cooking and because Walt had ridden with him before either had gray in his beard, set apart mending a length of harness leather. He'd said almost nothing to Cole in 2 days. He said something now. "Heard your daddy ran freight through Miller's Creek country, that crossing where the Denby boy drowned, 58, 59? 59. I wasn't born yet. My father talked about it." "What did he say?" "Said most men cross a river by fighting the current straight on, because that's what looks brave. Said the current doesn't care what looks brave. Said you let the herd bunch a little upstream of where you actually want them to land, because the water pushes them downstream while they're swimming it. And if you don't account for that, you fight the current the whole way instead of using it." Cole paused. "Said the Denby boy fought it straight on. Everybody told him that was the brave way." Silas was quiet a long moment, working the leather between his fingers. "That's not nothing," he said finally. "Most men on this drive have never crossed anything worse than a creek their own outfits crossed 40 times, with a boss who's crossed 30 of those 40. You're describing a different kind of knowing." He looked up, direct. "Don't tell yourself that makes you the expert on tomorrow's crossing. You don't know this river. But don't let Pratt tell you it makes you nothing either. It's one good card. Whether it's the right one, we'll find out." He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Cole sat with that a long while after Silas had gone quiet over his mending, turning the old man's words slower than he'd turned over anything Pratt had said in 3 days, because it was the first thing anyone on this crew had offered him that wasn't a joke and wasn't an order. One good card. He rode the rest of that evening's watch, turning the phrase over like a stone in his pocket, worn smooth from handling. And it was still there in the morning when Walt Ender told them they'd cross the river that day. Coming out of the water, Walt Ender sat his horse on the far bank a long moment, breathing hard, looking back at 800 heads standing wet and steaming and alive on solid ground. Then he looked at Cole, really looked at him, for the first time in 3 days. "Where'd you learn that?" "My father, Miller's Creek country. 20 years of worse crossings than this one, every week." Walt didn't say anything else right away. He sat his horse a moment longer, the water still running off both of them, the herd settling into its grazing on the far bank. Then he swung down, boots landing hard in the mud, and stood there next to Cole's horse instead of riding on to check the count, the way 11 years of habit would have had him do. "That hand I told you about, better rider than you on paper, Probably better than you'll ever be on paper. He fought that water same as everybody but you did today. Paper's not worth much against a river. He held Cole's eye a moment longer than the sentence needed. Don't let this crew's first 3 days tell you what the next 10 years look like. I nearly didn't. Dwayne Pratt didn't say a word for the rest of that evening. Not a joke, not a jab, nothing, which was its own kind of statement from a man who'd had something to say at every fire for 3 straight nights. Later, alone at the picket line, checking his horse's legs in the dark, Cole heard boots behind him and turned to find Pratt standing there, hat off, not looking at him directly. "What you did in that water?" Pratt turned to the hat once in his hands, slow, like he was deciding how much of this he actually wanted to say out loud. "I'd have drowned half this crew holding that line straight. I've run 11 drives and never once crossed water that high, and I still would have held that line because that's what I was taught looked right." He was quiet a beat. "I told this outfit for 3 days you were nothing. I've got the rest of this drive to sit with how loud I said it." Cole didn't say it was fine. It wasn't quite, not yet, and some part of him, the part that had been standing at the edges of fires his whole life, understood that letting Pratt off easy right now would cost the moment something neither of them could get back. So he said the only thing that felt true. "You held the line because you'd never seen it done different. Now you have." Pratt looked at him a moment, something moving behind his face that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite relief, and nodded once, and put his hat back on, and walked back toward the fire. That was the whole of it between them. No more said then or ever. But something real had changed hands at that picket line, and both men knew it. It was Otto Kraft, the hand who'd laughed loudest at Miller's Creek jokes, who said the other thing that mattered, crouching down near Cole's horse a little later. "That thing you did with the angle," Otto said, quiet, not for an audience. "Where's a man even learn that if he's never run a real outfit's drive?" "Same place you learn anything. Somebody who knew it taught it to somebody who needed it." Otto nodded slowly, like the answer cost him something to accept, and didn't say anything else. It was as close to an apology as Cole was going to get from that fire. It was enough. The drive reached the railhead at Miles City on schedule, 800 head delivered whole. Walt paid Cole his wage same as any hand, no bonus, no ceremony, but he shook his hand doing it, which he hadn't done with anyone else on the crew. "Barkay rides with you again," he said. 5 words. They traveled through cattle country faster than the freight hauler's boy story ever had. By 1989, Cole ran his own outfit, modest, built slow, built on a reputation that started at a river crossing and spread hand to hand, camp to camp, the way reputations do in that country. Pratt worked for him twice in later years, on drives Cole's own outfit ran, and never once mentioned Miller's Creek again. Neither did Cole. Some things didn't need saying twice. Silas Redmond died in 1978, and Cole was one of 6 men who carried him out. His daughter, closing up the old man's place, gave Cole a length of harness leather he recognized, the same piece Silas had been mending at that fire, 17 years worn since, the stitching still holding. Cole's own son, Danny, rode his first drive at 19, same age, same position, drag, on a crew that didn't know his name yet either. Cole didn't tell him what to expect. He'd learned 17 years earlier that a man finds his own river. But he gave him one thing the morning Danny rode out, Silas Redmond's harness leather, 30 years worn, stitching still holding, and didn't explain what it meant, and Danny didn't ask. Nobody wanted him on the crew. By the time the water calmed, nobody was laughing. This is farm lore, where we tell the kind of rural stories like his. Stories of cattle drives, ranch crews, and the kind of trust that only gets earned in the water. If stories the land still remembers mean something to you, subscribe and join us for the next one.